Tsunade would be walking the streets of Konoha as she would be heading towards the exit. She is still in her combat gear as she had just returned from a mission that had been assigned by the 4th Hokage. But it would only be discovered upon her return that while she was gone, the Leaf had befallen a siege by an unknown assailant and the Nine Tails, which resulted in the death of the 4th Hokage, Minato. Even though it had been obvious that Hiruzen would be reinstated as the Hokage, Tsunade would think to herself that everything might just be too overbearing. This would result in her leaving the village, even if only temporary, to clear her heads of all the memories that are arising, that of her lover Don and her younger brother. This would be somewhat emotional. She had hoped that someone she could talk to had been there, but come to find that even Jiraiya had been out on a mission, meaning she had no one to comfort her. Thus, she would temporarily leave/vacate the village to a nearby town, where her gambling addiction and alcohol addiction would take over her life for a while, as she would become a drunken gambler. But as things go on, she would soon come to discover that her lover Don had a niece, and would even discover that this niece had actually been orphaned in the Ninetales attack. And at first, she would be flooded with guilt, having been present but not there for the child. And since that day, 5 years had passed, meaning some time has gone by. And on top of that, for the most part, she had been locked to a strict amount of towns within the Land of Fire and maybe some others. She would decide she'd return to the village to claim her former lover's niece as her new apprentice, and while she's at it, sever her ties to the Leaf, so that she can make full use of her Sannin traveling rights. And she heads to Konoha with this exact intention. She would look upon the gates not having been there in 5 long years, and would enter it to discover that everything had gone back to commonplace. Of course, Tsunade, still in a grieving state, would have a strong hatred toward the people of the village for having moved on after all these travesties had happened, having a smile on their face like everything's just okay. So she would march straight down to the Hokage's office, where she would reveal her intentions. She would say she'd be back to make sure they understand once she gets her lover's niece, or as she says, the kid. She would return with a young Shizune who at first would be reluctant to follow, but via persuasion of Tsunade's pet pig, she would come along. This would lead to Tsunade screaming down Hiruzen in the council's ears, as she would make it clear that she's no longer a Leaf Shinobi. She's not a rogue either. In fact, she's no longer a shinobi. She's retiring and leaving this shithole, and would storm off. At first, she'd obviously be stopped by the gate, as Shizune had not yet gotten clearance to leave. And Tsunade would realize that this had all been quite a rush. The young Shizune would reveal that she had no intention of leaving the Leaf anytime soon, or matter of fact, the orphanage, and had actually left all her belongings there, and would actually beg the Sannin to let her go back, say goodbye to her friends, and collect some family mementos. Tsunade, at first in a haste to leave the village, would calm down and accept the child's request, as she would return her to the orphanage temporarily and head back to the Hokage's office, where she would come to find the council had disbanded, leaving only Hiruzen alone in his office. She would take this opportunity to go and apologize to her sensei for the drastic outburst, and even explain that she just can't be a shinobi anymore. Things have gone too wrong for her. And as she does reveal all this to Hiruzen, he would reveal a secret of his own. He'd reveal that he had actually had a meeting with the 4th Hokage's only born son a few days prior. She would at first be surprised, as she had thought the 4th's child had died in the Ninetales attack, but would be at least informed by Hiruzen that the current host of the Ninetales, or its Jinchuriki, is actually the blood of Minato. He'd actually also revealed that the entire village is knowledgeable about this, even though he had put a ban on the information. Tsunade would have a small outburst saying how he could let information like that slip since it puts the kid in ample danger, and Hiruzen would let his head lower as he does feel extreme amounts of guilt. He revealed that Danzo had been the one to reveal the information, but he couldn't do anything about it since near the entire council was actually in support of him, meaning that Hiruzen couldn't do much. And on top of that, Naruto had actually been treated unfairly by the villagers. Tsunade would get angry at her sensei and he would tell her to wait, since she's gonna be more mad when he's done. He'd reveal that he had discovered, a few days prior once again, that the young boy had been kicked out of the orphanage, revealing the hatred of the Nine Tails from the villagers that was targeted towards Naruto all this time. Tsunade, at first even more infuriated, Hiruzen would explain. He would not let the boy get hurt as he made another lock on this information and even had Anbu guards on the boy, just to make sure. But nevertheless, people had a strong amount of hatred for him, and after encountering him in the forest and giving him a temporary home to stay, Hiruzen would reveal he feels Naruto to have much potential as one of the greatest shinobi to ever live. At first, Tsunade would scream at Hiruzen, saying that he had already messed up having this information spilled. But nevertheless, she does not care, since she's neither a resident of this village nor a shinobi anymore. This is Hiruzen's problem, and he has to handle it. At first, she had obviously thought he wanted her as a political standpoint to overwhelm the council into supporting his statements on the young boy. But Hiruzen would be quickly to counter, saying that he actually wants Tsunade to, as a last favor from teacher to student, take the boy with him and turn him into the greatest shinobi he could possibly be. At first, Tsunade would be reluctant, saying that she can't take away the village's greatest weapon, and on top of that, she can't raise two kids. She doesn't even think she could raise the teenager that she had taken from the village moments prior. Hiruzen, nevertheless, would actually bow down his head and would beg his prior student. Tsunade, being surprised of her sensei's actions, would say that she would give the boy one chance. She would look to see who and what the boy is capable of and see if she would be interested in taking him as a second apprentice. Hiruzen would thank her as she would be off. She would enter the location that Hiruzen had revealed Naruto to be living in, and she would actually find him out on the streets. He looks exactly like the fourth, apart from the obvious slit marks on his face, indicating that he is the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails. She would watch him being bullied by some other kids, and even looked over by an adult. But nevertheless, Naruto would fight back. He would even attempt to use some form of clone jutsu. Obviously, it would fail, like to an extreme degree, but nevertheless it gave him enough of an opening to beat up the rest of the kids, as they were at first surprised, allowing him to take out one, and then in a state of laughter, which would allow him to take care of the other. The adult who was watching over them would walk away as he would see the Anbu on the buildings. This would result in Naruto screaming at him, "Hey, you bastard! I'm not done with you! Get back here! You piece of shit!" as the man would start jogging. Naruto would be more than enthusiastic to chase after the man, only to be stopped by Tsunade. At first, he thought that she was yet another aggressor, and would put up his fist, saying, "I don't care if you're an old lady, I'll fight you too!" With Tsunade getting irked at first, even having that classical anime frustration moment, but would reveal that she's actually here to help him. He would be confused at first, letting his entire guard down, which would allow one of the prior kids to sneak up on him and even land a blow. But nevertheless, after beating the kid back into submission, Tsunade would continue what she had said. She would reveal to Naruto that she had actually been there on part of Hiruzen, who had asked her to take Naruto and turn him into a great shinobi. Naruto, who had learnt shinobi have the most respect in the village, and even the power of the Hokage gives them infinite influence, he would decide he wants to be the next Hokage. He would scream this out in front of Tsunade, who would be more than irked by it to say the very least, but she would let it be for now. She would obviously have a long conversation about the Hokage position being a fool's job and so on and so forth, but Naruto wouldn't be fazed, and would even exclaim that if she continued disrespecting the Hokage, he wouldn't have any choice but to fight her. This would obviously result in Tsunade knocking the boy out and merely carrying him over her shoulder to pick up her actual apprentice, Shizune. This is where they would depart from the Leaf and go to some unknown town, even only temporarily. Naruto would most likely wake up on the road and would be met with Shizune, who would have a short conversation with him to reveal Tsunade. Tsunade would come up to the boy and actually apologize for just taking him out of the village like that, but they had to leave soon. She apologizes if there was anything that he needed in the village and would even offer that they could eventually go back to go get it. Naruto would at first scoff as he would roll up into somewhat of a fetal position. He'd reveal that everything he had found important had either been stolen or destroyed a long time ago, either by other kids in the orphanage or general villagers, as no one really got along with him. This not only leaves a sore spot in Tsunade's heart, but in his fellow apprentice Shizune's as well. And this is where a long, tedious journey between these three would begin. Quick intersegment here, guys. Recently, I have been getting into Twitter a lot more, as in using it as an outlet of information. So if you're interested in maybe having a say in community decisions on stories, and even the schedules on when your favorite series might release, go check out my Twitter, as it might give you some insight on when you could expect to see certain things popping back up on the YouTube channel. On top of that, we are trying to hit 1,000 followers by the end of the year over there, so even if you don't want that information, go follow me. I'd appreciate it. And with that out of the way, let's get back into the video. And now that we are a good portion into the video, I would like to go over some notes. First of all, obviously, Shizune had been aged down and Tsunade's mental breakdown had been pushed up. The reason for this is so that we could create an accurate timeline, or at least a sensical one, on how these encounters could possibly happen. First of all, Shizune had been reduced from an adult, which at this point in the story, she should have been around 21 years old. But we reduced her all the way down to the age of about 13, meaning she is instead only about 8 years older than Naruto instead of 13 years older. So this would mean she would have been around the age where if she had participated in the academy, which at least we would imply that she did, she could have possibly graduated. But that would have obviously been interrupted by Tsunade taking her out of the village. And even though, just like Naruto, she was reluctant at first, she would nevertheless have gone with Tsunade because Tsunade was the lover of her last family member, or one of her family members, that obviously being Don Kato. So, let's get back into it properly. Naruto and Shizune would quickly become close, as they're both in a awkward position, and Tsunade would not be that eager to start training them. But nevertheless, as a few days pass, Naruto would probably demand it, since Shizune would most likely either know who Tsunade is, or at least make some assumptions. They would quickly figure out that Tsunade is a legendary shinobi, and even if they don't, at least a strong one. Meaning Naruto, in his ever-longing quest to grow stronger, would approach his quote-unquote mother figure from here on going forward to at least demand, or at least infer training from her. She would at first deny the claims or the requests, as she would not want them to become shinobis. But nevertheless, as time ticked by, maybe days, maybe weeks, she would eventually be forced to do so, as she would see Shizune teaching the little she knows about chakra and jutsu to a young Naruto. Mind you, this is similar training to what Naruto did in the academy, meaning he wouldn't really gain that much from it. Obviously, there would be some basic chakra control exercises and explanations on how to wield chakra, and then physical execution of taijutsu, and maybe even some shuriken jutsu. This would eventually result in her attempting to teach Naruto the clone jutsu, which would catch Tsunade's eyes. She would eventually go up and explain that Naruto would probably not be able to do it. At first, Naruto would break out into his rumbustic self, saying that he could do anything if he put his mind to it, and would ask Tsunade to not underestimate him, when she would burst out in a laugh. She would then go on to explain that Naruto has a really high chakra reserve, and she would actually take this as a time to break it to the kid that he's the wielder of the nine-tailed fox. Naruto would be distraught only for a moment when he would be back up to his feet. At first, she was a little bit worried that Naruto might have taken that blow too hard, but it seems like he doesn't really care. He would say, nevertheless, he will master every jutsu thrown at him. When she would go back into explanation mode, she'd explain that a jutsu that's based on illusion, like the clone jutsu, requires a very fine concentration on chakra, which someone with as large of a reserve as Naruto shouldn't be capable of off the bat. In fact, it might take multiple years for him to even create one clone. In fact, it might be easier for him to create 50,000 than just one. Obviously, this is a overdramatized number, but he would say, nevertheless, he wishes to master the jutsu. Tsunade would finally take an interest, as she could see her brother Nawaki in Naruto, and would actually proceed to start his training. Obviously, with his training comes some refinement training for Shizune, as she is only up to basic academy standards. She would start them both off with the easiest chakra control exercise that they could participate in, that obviously being the tree climbing. And as one might thought, this would have been a similar interaction to Naruto and Kanon and Sakura's climb up the tree. Eventually, Naruto would start making some progress, and Shizune would get it down pretty quickly due to her high chakra control and low chakra reserves. But nevertheless, Tsunade would not let her slack. She would immediately put Shizune on reserve extension, meaning she would be doing the challenge of doing this for 3 hours straight every day, meaning that Shizune would still be working. But every time that she fell or take a break, she would actually use that time to at least try and help Naruto. For the first few days, Naruto would refuse her help as he wants to prove he can do it himself. But eventually, similar to how he did in Kanon, he would get frustrated and ask the person whom he sees as an older sister what her advice was. She would start explaining it and eventually even finish her training, as she would be able to do it for 3 hours straight every day or upon request, and would also be explaining this to Naruto. Obviously, there would be a different explanation or examination every so often as they try and correct what Naruto's doing wrong. And because of Naruto's even lower chakra control now than what he had in Kanon, it would take him possibly much longer. And for this specific case, we're gonna say around a month, meaning that it was not easy for him to be able to do this. And Tsunade would take no time getting to the harder subjects, which in this case would be things like water walking. But since all of you have seen things like this before, I would skip over the water walking training, saying that it would take a good month of non-direct training, since they would be moving from spot to spot, possibly even in places where there isn't much water to train on, until they would get to a proper town where they could host for a while, or at least until Tsunade's gambling addiction would get the better of her. But what time is better than teaching them meditation now? Meaning she would teach them not necessarily meditation, but what she thinks is life lessons. Meaning she would be pointing out things that went wrong for her and try to force that opinion onto the children. At first, it would be minor things like don't be an inconvenience to other people, don't let other people inconvenience you, and so on and so forth. Even going on to say that they should never develop a gambling or alcohol addiction, since it's gotten her practically into the ground. On top of that, it would get a little darker, as she would tell them to never get attached to people. Obviously, these would probably be in her drunken state, where she would talk about her brother, husband, and all the people that were lost during the war. Mind you, at this point, she probably would not have told Naruto that his father is the 4th Hokage, but would mention Naruto's father's death in the Nine Tails attack, meaning that there was some form of relation between everyone here and their connection to loss. Meaning, even though Shizune would attempt to at least convince Naruto to not let drunken Tsunade get to him, it would kind of seep through to his personality as time continues. And as a quick rundown for the chakra control training that they'd be going on about from now on forward, it would probably be exact types of training. For example, yes, these are taken from fanfics, I would like to remind you, but one of the more interesting ones that I've seen is practically being able to create a chakra string, or not necessarily in the normal case, where you would create a string completely out of chakra, since that requires a already existing knowledge, but instead coexisting string and chakra to the point where you could control its movement, which in my opinion is a very unique concept. So this would be their form of advanced chakra training. And as one might guess, Shizune would probably get this down a lot quicker than Naruto. And this is where Shizune would start differentiating her training from that of what Tsunade is teaching. She would take a similar path to the Elder of the Sand Chio and would be really interested in different types of poisons and toxins. At least she'd be doing this waiting for Naruto to finish his control training. Obviously, Tsunade can't just let her be until Naruto finishes, so she would start off on basing healing exercises. Meaning, by the time Naruto finishes, Shizune has some extra things on her plate, and obviously this would take Naruto longer as his chakra is refining the more he practices. Meaning his reserves are increasing and it becomes more difficult for him to control it. But nevertheless, they would eventually both move on to practically all the training that Sakura did in canon. This means basic healing exercises, healing control exercises, which is things like chakra scalpels and so on and so forth, and even medicinal methods, which would probably come afterwards. For Shizune, it might be in between. But nevertheless, Naruto and Shizune would both become very knowledgeable on not only medical ninjutsu, surgery, but also the general medicinal herbs that could be used to heal people in other ways. I'm not saying anything like ritualistic or even voodoo, but more in a way of medicines, meaning they would not only be surgeon type or healing types, but also general doctors, meaning they can actually make a proper living traveling from town to town funding Tsunade's gambling addiction, even though that most likely would go overboard at some point, putting them in crippling debt. And with that, this video will sadly come to an end. I really do hope y'all enjoyed the jumpstart to What If Tsunade Raised Naruto and are hyped for what's to come, since this is going to be a story-based series, meaning we might not necessarily jump directly into canon if that is ad canon at all. Meaning this story is a lot more like a fanfic than an actual hypothetical. Meaning if you're one of those people that take everything way too seriously, maybe this isn't for you. But to those who are going to stick around, I really do appreciate you, and I would like to thank every single one of you for watching this video. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure to smash subscribe and hit that bell notification. You might even be notified the next time when I post this series. So, yeah, Without further ado, every person you currently see on screen is a member. The people who help this channel sustain itself, at least via revenue, by giving me a financial gain while using YouTube as a creative outlet. If you want to see yourself on screen, make sure to go check out the join options, or even alternatively, go to my channel and check out the membership section, where you will be explained to all the benefits of being one. So without further ado, roll that outro.